August 19th, 2023, 6 a.m., Alexandroupoli, Greece. The sun rises over what many consider one of Europe's most pristine wilderness areas. Families in the port city prepare for another day of late summer, children getting ready for the final weeks before school starts. In the nearby Dadia National Forest National Park, one of Europe's most important bird sanctuaries, the morning mist clings to ancient oak and pine trees that have stood for centuries. This protected forest is home to 36 of Europe's 39 diurnal birds of prey, including 3 of the continent's 4 vulture species. What none of them know is that 50 kilometers to the southwest, in the drought-stricken hills near the village of Melia, a spark is about to ignite what will become the largest single wildfire in European Union history. By the end of the month, the Dadia forest will be 58% destroyed, 20 people will be dead, and smoke from Greek fires will darken skies as far away as southern Italy. The flames that begin today will consume 94,250 hectares and expose the deadly gap between Europe's ability to predict disasters and its systems for responding to them. The 2023 Greek wildfire season began with conditions that fire scientists describe as catastrophic. Greece had just experienced its hottest July on record, with temperatures soaring above 40 degrees Celsius for weeks. The country had also endured its driest spring in decades, with rainfall 60% below the long-term average. Ancient olive groves that had survived Ottoman rule and 2 world wars were withering under the relentless heat. But it was the weather pattern that developed in mid-August that transformed these dry conditions into a continental emergency. A massive anticyclone, a high-pressure system that acts like a lid on the atmosphere, settled over southeastern Europe, trapping hot air close to the ground and preventing the formation of rain clouds. Under this dome, temperatures reached 46.4 degrees Celsius in some areas, while relative humidity dropped to single digits across vast expanses of forest and grassland. The first fire erupted on August 19th near the village of Melia in the Evros region, close to the Turkish border. Within hours, it had consumed 500 hectares. By evening, it had burned 2,000 hectares. Local fire crews, experienced in battling blazes in this fire-prone region, attacked the flames with everything they had. But this fire was different. It was burning with an intensity and speed that veteran firefighters had never encountered in Europe. What made the 2023 Greek fires so dangerous wasn't just their size, it was their behavior. These weren't the typical Mediterranean fires that burned slowly through scrubland and olive groves. These were crown fires leaping from treetop to treetop at speeds that outran evacuation efforts, creating their own weather systems and generating fire tornadoes that could hurl burning debris kilometers ahead of the main fire front. A second major fire ignited on August 20th northwest of Gabrina Peak, deep within the Dadia National Park. The 2 fires, burning just 30 kilometers apart, began to merge as strong northeastern winds pushed them toward each other. By August 21st, they had combined into a single massive blaze that fire officials would later call simply the Evros fire, a monster that would burn for 16 days and become the largest wildfire in EU history. The human drama began unfolding in villages scattered across the Evros region. In the small community of Lefkimi, population 800, residents had always lived with the threat of wildfire. The village sat at the edge of the Dadia forest, surrounded by the oak and pine trees that provided both beauty and danger. But on the morning of August 22nd, as the merged fire approached their community, something was different. Maria Dimitriou, a retired teacher who had lived in Lefkimi for 60 years, had seen fires come and go. She had watched smoke plumes on the horizon and smelled the familiar scent of burning forest that marked late summer in northern Greece. But when she stepped outside her stone house that morning, the air itself seemed to be on fire. The sky had turned an ominous orange-black, and ash was falling like snow. The wind was gusting from the northeast, carrying with it not just smoke, but glowing embers that landed on rooftops and in gardens. The temperature was already 42 degrees Celsius at 8 a.m., with humidity so low that her throat burned with each breath. By noon, evacuation orders had been issued for Lefkimi and surrounding villages. Maria packed a small suitcase with photographs and documents, locked her house, and joined the stream of cars heading toward Alexandroupoli. As she drove away, she looked back to see a wall of flame 50 meters high bearing down on the forest, where she had walked as a child. What Maria and thousands of other residents didn't know was that they were witnessing the beginning of Europe's worst wildfire disaster in decades. The smoke from the Greek fires wasn't just affecting local communities, it was being carried by high-altitude winds across the Mediterranean, creating air quality emergencies in cities hundreds of kilometers away. By August 23rd, the scope of the disaster was becoming clear. The Evros fire had consumed more than 50,000 hectares and was still growing. Satellite images showed a massive plume of smoke stretching from Greece to southern Italy, creating a pollution highway that spanned the central Mediterranean. In Rome, 1,200 kilometers from the fire, air quality monitors detected particulate matter from the Greek blazes. The fires were creating their own weather patterns, generating massive pyrocumulus clouds that rose 12 kilometers into the atmosphere. These towering columns of smoke and ash were being caught by the prevailing winds and carried westward across Europe. For the first time in modern history, a single wildfire was affecting air quality across multiple European countries. But it was the human cost that truly captured the magnitude of what was happening. The official death toll stood at 20 people, but the true number of victims may never be known. Among the dead were 19 irregular migrants who had been hiding in the forest near the Turkish border. Their bodies were found huddled together, apparently overcome by smoke and flames as they tried to escape the Inferno. The discovery of the migrants' bodies exposed a tragic dimension of the disaster. The Evros region, with its border location and dense forests, had become a corridor for people seeking to enter the European Union. Thousands of migrants and asylum seekers crossed through these forests each month, many of them vulnerable and without resources to escape when disaster struck. The wildlife impact was equally devastating. The Dadia National Park, established in 1980 to protect one of Europe's most important bird sanctuaries, lost 58% of its total area to the flames. The park had been home to the continent's largest breeding colony of black vultures, with 36 pairs nesting in the ancient trees. When the fires swept through their nesting areas, an estimated 80% of the colony was destroyed. Dr. Elżbieta Kret, a Polish ornithologist who had moved to the Dadia forest 16 years earlier to study the vultures, watched in horror as decades of conservation work went up in flames. The birds she had spent years protecting were circling overhead, their nests and feeding grounds reduced to ash and charred stumps. I kept thinking they were asking, "What happened to our home? What is our future?" she said, watching the vultures soar over the blackened landscape. The destruction of their habitat meant that Europe's vulture population, already endangered, faced an uncertain future. The international response to the crisis was swift but inadequate. The European Union activated its civil protection mechanism, sending firefighting aircraft and personnel from France, Italy, Cyprus, and other member states. More than 600 firefighters from across Europe joined Greek crews in battling the blazes, creating one of the largest international firefighting efforts in European history. But even with international help, the fires continued to spread. The Evros fire was burning so intensely that it created its own weather patterns, generating winds that pushed flames in unpredictable directions. Traditional firefighting techniques proved inadequate against a fire that was behaving unlike anything European firefighters had encountered before. The economic impact was staggering. The port of Alexandroupoli, a crucial gateway for energy imports into southeastern Europe, was forced to suspend operations as smoke made it impossible for ships to navigate safely. Agricultural operations across the region were devastated, with olive groves and vineyards that had been cultivated for generations reduced to ash. The tourism industry, vital to the Greek economy, suffered massive losses as visitors canceled trips to avoid the fires and smoke. Hotels and restaurants in the region reported occupancy rates dropping to near zero as the disaster unfolded. The economic damage would ripple through local communities for years to come. But it was the environmental impact that revealed the true scale of the catastrophe. The fires released an estimated 1.8 million tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, equivalent to the annual emissions of a small country. Ancient forests that had served as carbon sinks for centuries were transformed overnight into sources of greenhouse gases. The destruction of the Dadia forest represented a loss that could never be fully recovered. Some of the trees that burned had been growing for 200 years or more. the complex ecosystem they supported. Home to rare birds, mammals, and countless species of insects and plants, had taken millennia to develop. Its destruction in a matter of days represented an environmental tragedy of continental significance. As September arrived and cooler temperatures finally began to slow the fires, the full scope of the disaster became apparent. The Evros fire had burned 94,250 hectares, an area larger than many European countries. It had destroyed hundreds of homes, displaced thousands of people, and fundamentally altered one of Europe's most important ecosystems. The fire had also exposed critical weaknesses in Europe's approach to wildfire management. Despite having sophisticated early warning systems and well-trained firefighting forces, the continent's resources were overwhelmed by the scale and intensity of the blaze. Traditional fire management practices, developed for smaller and less intense fires, proved inadequate for the extreme conditions created by climate change. The disaster highlighted the interconnected nature of environmental systems across Europe. Smoke from fires in Greece affected air quality in Italy. The loss of Greek forests reduced Europe's capacity to absorb carbon dioxide. The destruction of unique ecosystems represented a loss for continental biodiversity that could never be recovered. Perhaps most troubling was the realization that the 2023 Greek fires might not be an anomaly, but a preview of the new normal. Climate scientists had been warning for years that rising temperatures and changing precipitation patterns would make extreme fire seasons more common across southern Europe. The Greek fires provided a devastating confirmation of those predictions. The human stories emerging from the disaster were both heartbreaking and inspiring. In the village of Lefkimi, residents returned to find their community largely intact, saved by the heroic efforts of local firefighters and favorable wind conditions. But surrounding villages were not so fortunate. Entire neighborhoods were reduced to ash, their residents left with nothing but the clothes they wore during evacuation. The recovery process was slow and uneven. European Union funds were allocated for rebuilding efforts, but bureaucratic delays meant that many families waited months for assistance. Some communities chose not to rebuild at all, their residents relocating to safer areas away from the fire-prone forests. The psychological impact was equally severe. Children who had lived through the evacuation suffered from nightmares and anxiety. Adults struggled with depression and post-traumatic stress. The tight-knit rural communities that had existed for generations were scattered, their social fabric torn apart by the disaster. Today, as Greece continues to recover from the 2023 fire season, the lessons learned are being incorporated into new approaches to wildfire management. Early warning systems are being improved to provide better advance notice of extreme fire weather. Building codes are being updated to make structures more fire-resistant. Forest management practices are being revised to reduce fuel loads and create fire breaks. But the most important lesson of the 2023 Greek fires may be the recognition that wildfires are no longer just a local or even national problem. In an interconnected world where smoke can travel across countries and affect the health of people hundreds of kilometers away, wildfire management must become a European priority. The official death toll from the 2023 Greek wildfires stands at 20 people, but the true human cost extends far beyond that number. There are the families torn apart by the disaster, the communities that disappeared entirely, and the survivors who carry the trauma of that terrible August for the rest of their lives. For the families of the migrants who died in the forest, there may never be closure. Many of the victims were never identified, their names and stories lost along with their lives. They had come to Europe seeking safety and opportunity, only to perish in a disaster that revealed the continent's vulnerability to the changing climate. The environmental cost is equally immeasurable. The destruction of 58% of the Dadia National Park represents a loss for European biodiversity that will take centuries to recover, if it ever does. The ancient forests that burned had survived Ottoman rule, 2 world wars, and countless smaller fires, only to succumb to the extreme conditions created by human-induced climate change. If you're concerned about wildfire risk in your area, consider supporting organizations that work on forest management and fire prevention. And if you want to learn more about how climate change is affecting wildfire patterns across Europe and what can be done to address this growing threat, there are research institutions and advocacy groups working on solutions that deserve our attention and support. The smoke from the 2023 Greek fires has long since cleared from the skies over Rome and Naples, but the lessons of that terrible August remain in the charred landscape of the Dadia forest, a reminder that in our interconnected world, a fire that starts in one country can affect the health and safety of people across an entire continent. The Greek fires were Europe's disaster, but their impacts were felt far beyond national borders. A preview of the challenges we all face in a world where extreme weather recognizes no boundaries.